the most extraordinary domestic lockdown in modern royal history was not a shouted order or a slammed door. It was the soft, electronic chirp of a biometric keypad being reprogrammed. At 6:14 a.m. on a grey Wednesday morning, while Buckingham Palace was still half asleep and the morning shift hadn't yet reported for duty, King Charles III stood alone in the private corridor outside the Queen Consort's sitting room and pressed his thumb against the glass scanner. A technician from the Metropolitan Police Royalty Protection Command, summoned by emergency warrant just 20 minutes earlier, held a tablet device and entered a new access code. The green light on the panel flickered, turned amber, then reset to green. Charles's thumbprint remained valid. Camilla's was deleted. The king didn't speak. He didn't explain himself to the technician. He simply watched the light change colour, turned on his heel and walked back towards his own study at the end of the corridor. Behind him, the Queen Consort's private apartments were now sealed under sovereign-only access. No key, no override code, no staff clearance could open those doors without Charles's physical thumbprint. Camilla had been locked out of her own rooms inside her own home. And the reason wasn't an argument. It wasn't a health scare. It wasn't a renovation schedule. It was 17 handwritten letters, sealed inside a leather portfolio, discovered behind a false panel in a writing desk that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. Before we reveal what those letters actually say, why Charles reacted with a fury that terrified even his closest aides, and how this lockdown has permanently altered the balance of power inside the palace, make sure to hit subscribe to Crown Watch and turn on the notification bell. Because this isn't just a family dispute, this is a constitutional time bomb that has been ticking for 30 years, and it just detonated in the most private, painful way imaginable. To understand why a king would physically lock his wife out of Buckingham Palace, we need to rewind exactly 72 hours from that Wednesday morning to the moment the letters were found. The setting is critical. Buckingham Palace is currently undergoing the largest restoration project in its history. The 10-year, £369 million renovation of the building's core infrastructure, wiring, plumbing, heating, structural reinforcement, is now entering its fifth phase, which involves the private apartments on the first floor. These are the rooms where the royal family actually lives, as opposed to the state rooms used for ceremony. The restoration team working on this section is deliberately small. 4 specialist conservators, 2 structural engineers, and a project manager named David Hartley, who has worked on royal properties for over 22 years. These individuals hold the highest level of security clearance available to civilian contractors. They are vetted by MI5, bound by the Official Secrets Act, and contractually prohibited from discussing what they see inside the palace walls. They are professionals. They are discreet. And on this particular Monday morning, they were doing something that had never been done before, removing the original Victorian-era panelling from the walls of what is known as the Blue Sitting Room, a private space used by Queen Elizabeth II for personal correspondence during the final decades of her reign. The Blue Sitting Room is not a public space. It is not shown on tours. It is not photographed for magazines. It is a small, intimate room overlooking the palace gardens, furnished with a writing desk, 2 armchairs, and a bookcase filled with the late Queen's personal collection of detective novels. Queen Elizabeth used this room for private letters, birthday messages to grandchildren, condolences to friends, and what palace insiders call sovereign-to-sovereign correspondence, letters written to future monarchs, sealed and stored for delivery after her death. When the conservators began removing the oak panelling behind the writing desk, they expected to find the original plaster wall and perhaps some Victorian-era electrical conduit. What they found instead was a cavity. A deliberate, constructed cavity, approximately 14 inches wide and 10 inches deep, sealed with a thin sheet of lead. Inside this cavity rested a single object, a dark red leather portfolio, approximately the size of a large paperback book, closed with a brass clasp and tied with a faded blue silk ribbon. The portfolio bore no label, no name, no date, but pressed into the leather at the bottom corner, barely visible unless you knew to look, was a small embossed cipher, the personal monogram of Queen Elizabeth II David Hartley. The project manager immediately halted all work in the room. Protocol dictates that any sealed object discovered during restoration must be reported to the Royal Collection Trust before being moved or opened. Hartley contacted the Trust's senior registrar, who arrived within the hour. The registrar examined the portfolio without opening it, noted the Queen's cipher, and immediately escalated the matter to the keeper of the Privy Purse, Sir Michael Stevens, whose office oversees all matters relating to the sovereign's private property and personal effects. By 2 p.m. that same day, the portfolio had been transferred to a secure room in the palace basement. By 4 p.m., Sir Michael had informed King Charles of its discovery. By 5:30 p.m., Charles had cancelled his evening engagements and requested the portfolio be brought to his private study. By 7 p.m., he was alone with it. And by 9 p.m., according to insiders who witnessed the aftermath, the king had not spoken a single word to any member of staff for over 2 hours. He had simply sat at his desk, the portfolio open before him, reading and rereading the contents with an expression that one courtier described as the face of a man watching his own life collapse in slow motion. Now, let me explain what was inside that portfolio, because this is where the story becomes genuinely explosive. The portfolio contained 17 letters, handwritten on heavy cream notepaper bearing no royal crest or official watermark. They were not letters from Queen Elizabeth. They were letters to Queen Elizabeth, and they were written in a distinctive looping hand that palace staff recognised immediately by Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Camilla. The letters span a period from March 1994 to November 1997. For those who need a refresher on the timeline, this is the most sensitive, turbulent, and emotionally charged period in modern royal history. Charles and Diana separated in December 1992. Their divorce was finalised in August 1996. Diana died in Paris in August 1997. And throughout this entire period, Camilla was officially a private citizen, a friend, a companion, but not a member of the royal. She had no title, no official role, no constitutional standing whatsoever. And yet, the letters reveal that during this period, Camilla was writing directly to Queen Elizabeth II, not through intermediaries, not through Charles, directly. And the content of these letters is not personal gossip or social pleasantries. The letters contain detailed, specific, and deeply informed discussions about the future structure of the monarchy. Camilla was advising the Queen. She was offering opinions on which members of the royal family should be retained in public roles and which should be quietly retired. She was discussing the financial implications of various household configurations. She was, in essence, acting as an unofficial constitutional advisor to the sovereign at a time when she had absolutely no authority to do so. But that, while extraordinary, is not what made Charles's face drain of colour as he read them. The truly devastating content of the letters is contained in 7 specific passages spread across 4 separate letters, all dated between June and September 1996. In these passages, Camilla writes to the Queen about promises that Charles had made to her. Specific, detailed, written-in-stone promises about what would happen once Charles became king. According to these letters, Charles promised Camilla that upon his accession, her children Tom and Laura would be granted the courtesy style of Lord and Lady Parker Bowles, with a formal position in the royal household. He promised that her grandchildren would receive educational funding from the Privy Purse. He promised that a minimum of 2 senior courtiers from her pre-marriage household would be retained in permanent royal service. And most critically, he promised that Camilla herself would be granted the formal title Queen Consort with full constitutional privileges, including the right to sit on the Privy Council and receive all sovereign intelligence briefings. Now, some of these promises were partially fulfilled. Camilla did become Queen Consort. She does receive certain briefings, but the promises regarding her children, her grandchildren, and her Privy Council seat were never honoured. They were quietly dropped during the transition planning between Elizabeth's death and Charles's coronation. William and his legal team ensured they were excluded from the formal accession documents. Camilla accepted this publicly with grace. Privately, according to multiple sources, she was devastated. But here's the critical legal point that makes these letters so dangerous. Under British contract law, a written promise made by a sovereign in their personal capacity, if sufficiently specific and relied upon by the recipient, can constitute a binding obligation enforceable against the Crown estate. These letters don't just record Charles's promises, they record Camilla's acceptance of those promises and her subsequent actions taken in reliance on them. If these letters were to become public, or worse, if they were to be presented in a legal proceeding, they could potentially be used to challenge the current constitutional arrangement and demand fulfillment of the original promises. And there's more. 3 of the letters contain references to conversations between Camilla and senior political figures, specifically a former Prime Minister and a senior cabinet minister, whose names are mentioned by initial only. These conversations allegedly took place during the period of Charles's divorce, when Camilla was officially a private citizen. If these conversations involved any discussion of royal policy, succession planning, or constitutional reform, they represent an extraordinary breach of the separation between the Crown and the government. A private citizen advising the sovereign on policy is one thing. A private citizen serving as an intermediary between the sovereign and elected politicians is something else entirely. Charles read all 17 letters twice. Then he closed the portfolio. Then he sat in silence for 45 minutes. Then he picked up his phone and made a single call to Sir Michael Stevens. The instruction was brief, cold, and absolute. Seal the room. No one enters the private apartments until I give further orders, including the Queen. Sir Michael, who has served the royal family for over 3 decades, reportedly paused before asking for clarification. Charles repeated the instruction, including the Queen. The line went dead. What happened next was the physical manifestation of that instruction. At 10 p.m. that evening, a team of 4 security officers from the Royalty Protection Command quietly entered the private corridor and began the process of changing access protocols. Every electronic lock, every biometric scanner, every key-operated entrance to the private apartments was reprogrammed to sovereign-only access. Staff who normally had clearance to enter Camilla's sitting room, her dressing room, and her private bathroom were informed that their access had been temporarily suspended pending security review. No explanation was given. No time frame was provided. At 11:30 p.m., Camilla returned to the palace after attending a charity dinner at the Dorchester Hotel. She was accompanied by her lady-in-waiting and a protection officer. As she approached the entrance to the private corridor, her protection officer pressed his thumb to the scanner. The light turned red. Access denied. The officer tried again. Red.
He tried the manual override key. The lock didn't turn. He looked at Camilla. Camilla looked at the door. And in that moment, she understood. Something had happened, something fundamental, and Charles had not told her. She did not knock. She did not demand entry. She did not create a scene. She turned to her lady-in-waiting and said, very quietly, "Take me to Clarence House." The drive from Buckingham Palace to Clarence House takes approximately 7 minutes. In those 7 minutes, Camilla did not speak. She stared out the window at the London streets passing by, her face illuminated by the orange glow of streetlights. When she arrived at Clarence House, she dismissed her staff, walked to her private sitting room and sat down. She did not call Charles. She did not call her private secretary. She simply sat in silence until dawn. The next morning, Tuesday, the palace operated in a state of quiet, terrified paralysis. Staff who normally attended the Queen Consort's morning briefing arrived at the private apartments to find the corridor sealed. 2 equerries attempted to deliver the daily engagement schedule and were turned away by armed protection officers who refused to explain the lockdown. The Lord Chamberlain's office issued an internal memo stating that the Queen Consort's programme is temporarily suspended pending further notice. No reason was given. No duration was specified. Meanwhile, Charles had not slept. Insiders report that he remained in his study throughout the night, the portfolio open on his desk, surrounded by legal texts. He had summoned the Attorney General's office by secure phone at 4 a.m. and requested an emergency legal opinion on the enforceability of personal promises made by a sovereign prior to accession. The Attorney General's office, roused from sleep, assembled a small team and began working through the night. By 8 a.m., they had delivered a preliminary assessment. The letters, if authenticated and made public, could potentially form the basis of a civil claim against the Crown Estate.
The risk was not hypothetical. It was real.
At 9 a.m., Charles summoned Prince William to Buckingham Palace. The Prince of Wales arrived by helicopter from Highgrove, landing on the palace roof at 9:22 a.m. He was met at the top of the stairs by his father's private secretary and led directly to the study. What happened in that room for the next 2 hours has not been officially disclosed, but multiple sources have provided consistent accounts of the key moments. Charles placed the portfolio on the desk between them. He did not explain. He simply pointed to the letters and said, "Read." William read. He read all 17 letters in sequence without interruption, without commentary. His face, according to those who saw him afterwards, went through a series of subtle changes. Initial surprise, then recognition, then a slow cold hardening that settled into absolute stillness. When he finished, he placed the final letter back in the portfolio and closed the clasp. "When did she write these?" William asked. Charles told him. The dates, the period, the context. William nodded slowly. "Did you know they existed?" Charles shook his head. "No, I thought they were returned to her in 2005. Before the wedding, I thought they were destroyed." William was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that mattered most. "Who else knows?" Charles replied, "The project manager, the registrar, Sir Michael, the Attorney General, and now you." William asked, "Does she know they've been found?" Charles's silence was his answer. This is where Catherine enters the story. At 11 a.m., William left Buckingham Palace and returned to Kensington Palace. He went directly to the room he and Catherine used for private strategy discussions. A small, windowless room in the basement level, soundproofed, swept for listening devices monthly. He told Catherine everything, the letters, the promises, the legal risk, the lockdown. Catherine listened without interrupting. When William finished, she asked a single question. "What are you going to do?" William replied, "I don't know yet, but we need to understand the legal exposure before anyone else sees those documents." Catherine's response was immediate and strategically precise. "Then we need to control the narrative before it controls us. If this leaks, it won't be read as a love story. It will be read as a constitutional scandal, a private citizen advising the Queen, a sovereign making binding promises, political intermediaries. The tabloids will have a field day, and the Republicans will use it as evidence that the monarchy is corrupt." She paused. "We need to secure the originals, authenticate them legally, and determine whether they constitute enforceable obligations. And we need to do all of this before Camilla finds out they exist." But Camilla already knew, not that they had been found. She had no way of knowing that. But she knew they existed. She had written them. She had handed them to Queen Elizabeth personally in 4 separate private audiences between 1994 and 1997. She had watched the Queen read them, nod, and place them in a drawer in the blue sitting room. She had assumed they were gone, destroyed, filed away in some archive that would never see daylight. For 27 years, she had carried the knowledge of those letters in silence, telling herself they were irrelevant, historical curiosities that would never surface. And now, sitting in Clarence House on Tuesday morning, she received a phone call from her private secretary that changed everything. The secretary had been informed by the Lord Chamberlain's office that the Queen Consort's access to Buckingham Palace was under review, and that she should remain at Clarence House until further notice. The secretary asked if there was anything Camilla wanted to convey to the king. Camilla's response was 3 words. No, not yet. The word yet carried the weight of 27 years of silence. Camilla understood, with the clarity that comes only from decades of navigating institutional power, that Charles had found something. She didn't know exactly what, but she knew the timing, the restoration project, the blue sitting room, the writing desk, the letters. It all connected. And if Charles had found the letters, then he now knew the full extent of what she had written. Every promise, every name, every political reference, everything she had committed to paper in the desperate, hopeful belief that one day those words would become reality. At 2 p.m. on Tuesday, Camilla made a decision. She would not wait for Charles to summon her. She would not sit in Clarence House and let the machinery of the institution process her fate in silence. She would go to Buckingham Palace. She would walk through those doors, and she would face her husband. She dressed carefully. No jewels, no ceremony, a simple navy dress, flat shoes, her hair pulled back. She looked, according to those who saw her leave Clarence House, like a woman going to a funeral, not her own, someone else's. She arrived at Buckingham Palace at 2:47 p.m. The protection officers at the main entrance recognised her immediately and opened the doors. She was, after all, still the Queen Consort. No one had officially revoked her right to enter the building. The lockdown applied to the private apartments, not the palace itself. She walked through the grand hall, past the portraits of her predecessors, and approached the entrance to the private corridor. The protection officer stationed there recognized her. He also recognized that his orders were explicit: no entry to the private apartments without sovereign authorization. He stepped forward, not aggressively, but firmly. "Your Majesty, I'm sorry. Access to the private apartments is currently restricted to sovereign clearance only. I'll need to contact the King's office." Camilla looked at him. She didn't argue. She didn't invoke her title. She
Simply said, "Then contact him. Tell him his wife is here."
The call went up. The answer came down within 90 seconds. "His Majesty is unavailable. Her Majesty is requested to return to Clarence House and await further communication." Camilla stood in the corridor for a long moment. The officer watched her, uncomfortable, uncertain. Then Camilla turned and walked back through the grand hall, out the main doors, and into the waiting car. She did not look back. She did not speak. The car pulled away from the palace gates and disappeared into the London traffic. The image of that moment, Camilla standing in the corridor, denied entry to her own home, was captured by a single palace CCTV camera. The footage was not leaked. It was not released. But it exists, and those who have seen it describe it as one of the most powerful images in modern royal history. A woman who spent 50 years fighting for a place inside these walls, standing on the wrong side of a locked door, her face perfectly composed, her dignity absolute, her world quietly ending.
Charles learned that she had come. He learned that she had been turned away. He learned that she had not argued, had not shouted, had not demanded. She had simply accepted it. And that acceptance, according to those close to him, broke something inside the king that the letters themselves had not. The letters had triggered his fury. Her quiet compliance triggered his grief. He had locked her out to protect the institution, but in doing so, he had reminded her, and himself, that the institution always comes first. Always. Even when it costs everything. The legal assessment was delivered on Wednesday morning. The Attorney General's team, after 2 days of intensive review, presented their findings in a sealed briefing to Charles, William, and Sir Michael Stevens. The conclusion was nuanced but clear. The letters, while deeply damaging if made public, did not constitute legally enforceable obligations in their current form. The promises made by Charles were expressed in personal, informal language. They were not executed as formal instruments. They lacked the requisite legal formalities to constitute binding contracts under the Crown Proceedings Act. However, and this was the critical caveat, the letters did establish a documented record of intent that could be used in a public campaign to pressure the monarchy. They could be presented to Parliament as evidence of undisclosed commitment. They could be published in a book or documentary as proof that the sovereign made promises he did not keep. The legal risk was not litigation. It was narrative. It was the court of public opinion. And in that court, the letters were devastating. William's response to the legal assessment was characteristically forward-thinking. "We can't destroy them," he said. "If we destroy them and it ever becomes known, we look guilty. We look like we're covering something up, but we can't leave them accessible either. They need to be sealed. Properly. Legally. Under the same protocols as the sovereign's will." Charles agreed. The letters would be transferred to the Royal Archives, sealed under a 90-year embargo and classified as sovereign personal correspondence, absolute restriction. They would not be destroyed, but they would not be seen again in any living person's lifetime. But sealing the letters solved the institutional problem. It did not solve the personal one. Charles still had to face Camilla. He still had to explain why he had locked her out, why he had turned her away at the door, why he had chosen, in the most public and physical way possible, to exclude her from the life they had built together. And he still had to decide what, if anything, he would say about the contents of the letters. The confrontation, if it can be called that, took place on Thursday evening at Clarence House. Charles went to her, not the other way around. He travelled without his private secretary, without an equerry, without any attendant. He arrived at 7 p.m, was shown into Camilla's private sitting room, and the door was closed behind him. No staff were present. No record was kept. What was said in that room belongs to them alone.
But the aftermath speaks volumes. Charles emerged 40 minutes later. His eyes were red. His hands, according to the protection officer who drove him back to the palace, were trembling slightly. He did not speak during the drive. When he arrived at Buckingham Palace, he went directly to his study and remained there for the rest of the evening. The following morning, an internal memo was issued. The Queen Consort's access to the private apartments was restored. All biometric clearances were reinstated. All staff restrictions were lifted. The lockdown was over, but things were not the same. They could not be the same. Camilla returned to Buckingham Palace on Friday morning, but she did not go to the Blue Sitting Room. She did not go to the private corridor. She went directly to her office, reviewed her engagement schedule, and resumed her public duties, as if nothing had happened. The staff noticed, however, that she no longer lingered in the private apartments after evening engagements. She no longer stayed late in the gardens. She no longer used the Blue Sitting Room for personal correspondence. The room where the letters had been hidden was now implicitly off-limits to her, not by lock or code, by silence, by the weight of what had been found there. The letters themselves were transferred on Friday afternoon. A single archivist from the Royal Collection Trust, accompanied by Sir Michael Stevens, carried the sealed portfolio from the palace basement to a climate-controlled vault beneath the round tower at Windsor Castle. The portfolio was placed inside a steel lockbox, which was placed inside a sealed archive container, which was logged in the registry under a classification code that ensures it will not be opened, reviewed, or referenced for 90 years. The entry in the registry reads simply, Sovereign Personal Correspondence, 1994 to 1997. Absolute restriction. No access without reigning sovereign's written authorization. William and Catherine watched the transfer on a secure video feed from Kensington Palace. Catherine turned to William as the vault door closed and said, quietly, It's over. William shook his head. No, it's contained. There's a difference. He was right. The letters were sealed, but the knowledge of their existence was not. Charles knew, William knew, Catherine knew, Camilla knew, the Attorney General's team knew, the archivist knew, Sir Michael knew, the project manager who found them knew, the technician who reprogrammed the locks knew. The secret was not destroyed, it was distributed, and distributed secrets have a way of surfacing eventually. The broader implications for Camilla's position are significant and lasting. The letters revealed that during the most sensitive period of Charles's divorce, she was not merely a passive companion waiting for her moment. She was
actively engaged in shaping the future of the monarchy. She was advising the Queen, she was discussing policy, she was making plans. This knowledge, once possessed by Charles and William, fundamentally alters how they perceive her role within the institution. She is no longer simply the king's wife.
She is a woman who, for a brief period, operated as an unofficial power broker at the highest levels of the state. And that knowledge, however privately held, changes everything. Camilla, for her part, has never publicly acknowledged the letters. She has not addressed them in interviews, in memoirs, in conversations with staff. She has not asked Charles about them. She has not demanded their return or their destruction. She has simply continued her work, continued her engagements, continued to stand beside the king with the same quiet, steady presence she has maintained for decades. But those who know her well say there is a new stillness about her, a new caution, a new awareness that the ground beneath her feet is thinner than she believed, and that the institution she loves can lock her out as quickly as it let her in. Charles's fury, the rage that drove him to reprogram locks and seal corridors, has not entirely dissipated. It has transformed. It has become something quieter, more complex. Grief, certainly. Guilt, undoubtedly. But also a fierce, protective determination to ensure that the letters never surface. He has given instructions that the vault at Windsor is to be monitored continuously, that the classification code is to be reviewed annually, that no future restoration project is to proceed in the Blue Sitting Room without his personal authorization. The letters are sealed, but Charles watches over them like a man guarding a wound that must never reopen. Prince William's perspective on the entire episode has deepened his understanding of the monarchy's vulnerabilities. He now knows that the institution's greatest threats are not external. Republican campaigns, media scrutiny, public indifference, but internal. The private words of its members,
The promises made in love or desperation. The letters written in hope and sealed in drawers. These are the materials from which constitutional crises are built, and they can surface at any time, in any renovation, in any archive, in any moment of institutional vulnerability.
Catherine's role in the resolution has further cemented her reputation as the monarchy's most effective strategic thinker. She understood from the beginning that the crisis was not legal but narrative. The letters were not enforceable in court, but they were devastating in the court of public opinion. Her strategy was therefore not to fight the letters but to contain them, to seal them, to control access, to manage the story, and she succeeded. The story is not leaked, the tabloids have not published, the Republicans have not weaponized. The letters exist, but they are invisible. And invisibility in the modern media landscape is the closest thing to safety that exists.
The blue sitting room has been restored. The paneling has been replaced.
The writing desk has been returned to its original position. The cavity behind the wall has been sealed with new plaster and painted over. There is no visible trace of what was found there, but the room feels different to those who enter it now. Lighter, perhaps. As if something heavy has been removed and the space is still adjusting to its absence. Queen Elizabeth's portrait hangs above the desk, her expression serene, her gaze fixed on the gardens beyond the glass. She kept those letters for 27 years. She never opened them again after filing them. She never mentioned them to Charles. She never confronted Camilla. She simply held them, kept them safe, waited, and in the end it was the building itself that gave them back. The question that lingers, the question that no one inside the palace will answer but everyone is asking, is this: why did Queen Elizabeth keep the letters? Why didn't she destroy them? She had every opportunity. She had 27 years in which to feed them to a fire, shred them, dissolve them in water. She chose not to. She chose to seal them behind a panel in her most private room, where only a restoration project or a deliberate search would find them. Was it insurance? Was it a reminder? Was it a message to the future? A way of saying, I saw everything, I knew everything, and I kept the record. Perhaps Elizabeth understood that the monarchy's survival depends not on the suppression of its history, but on its careful management. You don't destroy the evidence of difficult decisions. You archive them. You seal them. You control access. You ensure they surface only when the institution is strong enough to absorb the shock. The letters surfaced during Charles's reign because the building demanded renovation. But perhaps Elizabeth knew they would surface eventually. Perhaps she trusted that by the time they did, the monarchy would be resilient enough to handle them. And perhaps she was right. The institution absorbed the shock. The letters were sealed. The king and queen survived. The machinery continued. But survival is not the same as healing. Charles and Camilla still share the same roof. They still attend the same engagements. They still stand together on balconies and wave to crowds. But the private architecture of their marriage has been altered. The trust that allowed Camilla to believe she was truly, permanently, irrevocably part of this institution has been fractured, not destroyed, fractured, and fractures, however fine, change the way a structure bears weight. Camilla will continue her work. She will continue her charities. She will continue to stand beside the king with grace and professionalism, but she will never again write a letter to a sovereign. She will never again commit her hopes, her promises, her expectations to paper. She has learned, in the most painful way possible, that words written in private can outlive the people who wrote them.
That promises made in love can become liabilities in law. That the institution does not forgive, it archives. And archives eventually open. The palace has resumed its normal operations. The restoration continues. The public tours proceed. The state banquets are held. The machinery grinds forward, indifferent to the private wounds of those who operate it. The lockdown lasted 4 days. 4 days in which a king locked his wife out of their home because of letters written 30 years ago. 4 days that will never appear in any official history, any authorized biography, any documentary produced with palace cooperation. They exist only in the memories of those who lived them, and in the sealed vault at Windsor, where 17 letters rest in darkness, waiting for a future that may never come. What do you think? Was Charles justified in locking Camilla out to secure the letters? Or should he have told her immediately, shared the discovery,
faced the crisis together. Was Queen Elizabeth right to keep the letters, or should she have destroyed them to protect her son? Do the letters change how you view Camilla's role in the monarchy's history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and this community's insights always deepen the conversation. And if you want to stay ahead of the royal stories the mainstream media won't touch, make sure you're subscribed to Crown Watch. Turn on the notification bell. Share this video with someone who understands that the real story is always behind the locked doors. Because in the House of Windsor, the most powerful words are the ones no one is allowed to read. And the most dangerous secrets are the ones sealed behind a panel, waiting for the right moment to surface. Stay curious, stay informed, stay questioning. And remember, every palace has its hidden rooms, every desk has its secret drawers, and every queen keeps her letters. Until next time, keep your eyes on the walls. Goodbye.